Later, time now for the France 24 debate. Donald Trump's Attorney General claims it will create jobs, the rescinding of the Obama-era decree that allows so-called dreamers to stay in the United States. It means 800,000 undocumented residents, all of whom arrived before the age of 16, now face the threat of deportation to the land of their parents. Trump has made the repeal of DACA, as it's known, a campaign pledge alongside the building of that wall along the Mexican border. And while Americans grapple over the fate of dreamers and immigration reform over in the UK, it's legal migrants that are in the crosshairs of the government, it seems. A leaked memo calls for tighter controls on letting families in and a selection that would mete out unskilled EU workers after Brexit. It's this Britain First sentiment that led a majority of citizens there to vote for leaving the European Union. And while attitudes to Brexit may have since wavered, the anti-immigrant feelings, say pollsters, is arguably just as strong. And so the question begs, can an open society coexist with closed borders? Is moving to another country to earn a living a right or a privilege? Where's it all going? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the blowback against immigration. With us, Nancy Green, who teaches at EHESS, Paris's School of Higher Learning and Social Studies. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us from Washington. Roy Beck, president of the immigration reduction lobby group Numbers USA. Welcome to the show.
Greetings.
Also in the U.S. Capitol, James Kirchick, visiting fellow at the Brookings Institute and the author of The End of Europe. Welcome back.
Thank you.
And from London, Rory Broomfield, director of the Freedom Association and the Better Off Out campaign. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and on Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. The state of New York is banding together with other states to challenge the legality of President Trump's Tuesday rollback of the Dreamer program. Legal limbo awaits many, as Elizabeth Walsh reports.
26-year-old Tomas Pendola teaches chemistry at one of the best high schools in Florida, where he has lived since he was 10 years old. In 2001, his family fled the financial crisis in Argentina that forced half the population into poverty. He has grown up in the United States thanks to DACA, which has granted work permits and deportation relief to nearly 800,000 unauthorized immigrants who arrived in the country before the age of 16.
So for me, the way that DACA changed my life is that it allowed me to stay in the U.S. and give back to the U.S. as opposed to just get my degree and have to leave.
But Donald Trump has announced plans to end the program, leaving Congress with 6 months to find a legal replacement. Without the program, Tomas would be forced to abandon his hopes to pursue a degree in chemistry, as well as the opportunity to continue to teach. While he could return to Argentina, for others from countries like Honduras, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, he points out that deportation could put their lives at risk.
And this is like how most undocumented immigrants feel, because I mean only 800,000 of us have DACA, but there's 11 million of us who feel like they don't belong, like they're always scared.
Tomas feels American, but like others, he struggles with the legal insecurity.
And you grew up in a country where they're telling you that you don't belong here. I mean, you feel American. Everything that America stands for, you do as well. Freedom, liberty, opportunity. That's all that you want for yourself and for your family. And yet, people are telling you you don't belong here.
Lawmakers on both sides have joined the outcry from Silicon Valley executives like Mark Zuckerberg, Tim Cook, and others from the financial sector and other industries who oppose the White House decision. For now, Tomas and thousands of others wait in limbo for Congress to act.
Roy Beck, what would you like to see happen to Tomas?
Well, people like Tomas, based on what I just heard, have a compelling story. And the majority of people who got DACA work permits have compelling stories. The thing that public policy has to deal with is balancing that against the compelling stories of the millions of Americans who are struggling, either struggling on low and stagnant wages are struggling without a job. There are 50 million working-age Americans that do not have jobs. Now, not all of them need a job, but a good share of them live in or near poverty. And so when you add hundreds of thousands, and in our case in America, millions of immigrants with work permits every decade to the labor force, you increase the supply and increase also the demand, but not as much. So we have to figure out a way, if we're going to help people like Tomas, we have to figure out a way how to reduce the harm to the most vulnerable Americans.
So you're suggesting that Tomas is taking a job away from, say, another high school chemistry teacher? That's his job right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly on the high school chemistry teacher, but I do know that the vast majority of the people who got DACA they're not college graduates, and they work in construction and manufacturing and hospitality and other service jobs, just like the majority of Americans do. And you know, on a case-by-case basis, you have to really determine what is the damage to the opportunity for Americans. 15 million millennials in the prime physical part of their life are not working right now. You know, 15 million American millennials. So it does, yes, it makes a real difference. Plus, it tends to depress the wages, especially at the lower end.
Nancy Green?
Well, I think certainly, I think everybody deserves a break, and there are questions about the types of jobs that all Americans as well as immigrants have in the United States. But I think if we think about it historically, it's clear that the history of immigration to the United States has actually been often contradictory, or has had a long history of going back and forth. There has been anti-immigrant sentiment over the years, since immigration began in a large way in the middle of the 19th century. So there's always been restrictionist tendencies, but there has also been a long-standing and a very important theme in American history, which is that of assimilation and of the power of immigrants to help the United States. That is part of American history. I don't think that has changed today. Those who are now at risk under the new measure belong to that history itself. As Tomas said, he feels American. These are people who came here very young and who feel that they are part of American society. They have done what other Americans have done, that Americans have done. They have found jobs, they have done schooling, and we can't forget that immigrants help the economy, and this is something which has been historically true and I think will continue to be true for the future.
But you heard Roy Beck say that they're taking away jobs. Of course, the U.S. right now has full employment. So
this is actually one of the comments I would have made as well. The unemployment rate in the United States is very, very low. It is true there are not all jobs are good jobs, but people are at work. And it has been rare historically that immigrants take away jobs from American-born citizens. What often happens is that they take jobs that people don't want or that can't be filled. And this is one of the things that today is under discussion.
All right, the Attorney General calls Obama's Dreamer program unconstitutional, adding that it's stolen hundreds of thousands of jobs from U.S. citizens.
We are people of compassion, and we are people of law. But there is nothing compassionate about the failure to enforce immigration laws. Enforcing the law saves lives, protects communities and taxpayers, and prevents human suffering. Failure to enforce the laws in the past has put our nation at risk of crime, violence, and terrorism.
Jamie Kirchick, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I support DACA. I don't believe it's in the interest of the United States to be deporting people who have lived here for most of their lives and are contributing. They're not criminals. They're high school graduates. They're college graduates. They're starting businesses. It's very cruel to kick them out of the country. But on the specific question of the legality of this measure, I think that the Attorney General might have a point. I mean, President Obama unilaterally enacted this policy through executive order in 2012 because Congress wouldn't pass a bill to his liking. And that's not how the system works in the United States. The president just can't create laws out of thin air. He has to sign them into passage after they're written in Congress. And so I'm really torn about this because I believe in the rule of law, and I don't think the president can just go around creating laws out of thin air. And interestingly, Donald Trump might seem to agree with me here because he's announced that he's going to take DACA off the books in 6 months. So he's given Congress a 6-month period in which they can try to come to some sort of agreement between Democrats and Republicans where perhaps they can inscribe DACA into law. Now that might require, the more pro-immigration people like myself in Congress, the Democrats, it might require them to give up something. They might have to agree to funding for the wall, or they might have to agree to lower numbers of unskilled legal immigrants. But that's what democracy is. It's about compromises.
Why is this, again, coming to a head now at a time when unemployment is so low in the United States?
Oh.
Well, it has nothing to do. It has nothing.
That's the youth.
Jamie Kirchick, go ahead.
Well, it has nothing to do with the employment levels. It's because this law is about to expire, and you have several attorneys general in many states who are going to sue the federal government if they allow this DACA policy to continue, and they have a very strong legal case. So this policy was coming to a head, and it's now up to our elected representatives in Congress to do something about it. They can't keep on kicking this can down the road.
Roy Beck?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say that we do have to remember that, yes, the official U3 unemployment rate of people who looked for a job last month is very low, and that's great. But the people who looked for a job 2 months ago or 3 months ago who are discouraged, and people who live in poverty and are not working, that number is huge. 15 million millennials and 50 million working age Americans are not in the labor market. So we have huge pockets of poverty around this country. And people who need to be recruited. Businesses don't recruit among the poor African Americans, the poor Hispanic Americans, the poor rural whites. They don't recruit among them because they don't need to, because our immigration system provides them with such a flow of very eager foreign laborers. The foreign laborers are great. They're hardworking. They're very motivated. So you have to remember that. I also want to correct a couple of things. DACA was not about deportations. DACA was about giving benefits, and that's the reason why a similar amnesty that was given by President Obama was ruled against by the federal courts. It mainly is about giving work permits. President Trump has already said in his administration they're not going to be looking for DACA people to deport. They weren't being deported except in very, very small numbers under President Bush, very small numbers under President Obama. This is all about who gets the work permits. And I know we're going to talk a little, I hope we'll talk a little more about the fact that I did say that I believe that these DACA people are deserving type people, but we have to come up with a compromise very similar to what was just mentioned, something that would reduce the future flow of legal immigrants into the labor pool to offset, compensate for adding these hundreds of thousands of people to the permanent labor force.
Rory Broomfield, when you listen to this conversation from London, what are your thoughts?
Well, obviously, I'm not a US citizen and I don't know that much about DACA, but from what I hear, I understand that there's a lot of parallels between the conversations happening in the US and the conversations happening in the UK over the new immigration policy, especially regarding numbers and regarding youth unemployment. This is an issue going forward that the UK would need to look at and solve. So inspiration from the debates happening in the States, I think, will be very helpful.
When it comes to that border wall that we've been talking about that Donald Trump wants, the Pew Research Center a few months back did a survey and found that the closer you get to the Mexican border, the less Republican support there is for making the wall a priority. Let me ask you about that, Nancy Green. How do you explain that?
Well, I think that people who are closer to the border also understand perhaps what the difficulties are. The border barriers have existed for quite a while now, and every time there is an extension of the border, then people just start moving and trying to cross at other points, many of which are even more dangerous than the places where they would have crossed otherwise. I think to talk about a wall when there's already, of course, a very extensive form of border control that is there. It's not always exactly clear what is going to be added and how and where, but it's clear that there are issues with regard to how this will be able to take effect. And as we know, it will have an impact both on people on both sides of the border. And I think that this is something which has been, it doesn't seem to be a fully thought out plan exactly how it's going to take effect.
Why is this such a big issue is the question.
I think similar to even the DACA issue, there is and is being, I think, increasingly, we're in a period which is historically not new, of having a increasing sentiment of anti-immigration, which is in contradiction with certain economic issues which have been discussed. So that there is sometimes working, I think, at cross purposes. And the issue, in fact, of immigration into the United States is different from the issue of what to do with people who are already there, who came as children, who didn't necessarily choose themselves to come. Some of them came as children. And I think that there are different issues and that maybe they need to be separated. This is not right now a wall issue, but obviously it's all part of the same discussion.
All part of the same discussion. It's quite a toxic conversation, Jamie Kirchick. We've seen all the protests of the last 24 hours. We heard earlier the Attorney General correlating this issue with a failure to prevent terrorism in the United States. Is the U.S. changing?
Well, certainly on this issue of immigration. I mean, I never really thought that a candidate running for president on such a restrictionist immigration policy would win. I mean, if you compare Donald Trump to the last Republican president, George W. Bush, who tried to pass a comprehensive immigration reform bill with Ted Kennedy during his presidency. I mean, it is a real shift, and the immigration hawks within the GOP basically won. They basically took over that party, and they're going to have to be accommodated. I mean, a lot of people on the other side of this issue, of which I include myself, they're acting as if we won the election, as if our side won this election, but we didn't. There was a presidential election last year, and the candidate who ran on a very restrictionist platform, he won. He won the presidency. And that's a democratic result, and it needs to be grappled with.
And it needs to be recognized. Jamie Kirchick, I'm going to have to interrupt you. We have to take a very quick break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.